Could the xenomorphs survive in the Helldivers universe? Now, I chose this matchup because I thought about the differences and similarities between the xenomorphs and the Terminates, and whether the xenomorphs would beat the Terminates. And then I thought, why not make a video about it? And here we are. I like this matchup because with the xenomorphs being basically exclusively ground-based, there's probably a flying variant out there, but I don't care. With them being largely ground-based, I don't have to consider space combat. Now, I love space combat. However, Helldivers space combat is left incredibly vague. It's very hard to compare the Helldivers universe to other sci-fi universes, because okay, let's say you compare it to Star Wars. You could either say Star Wars completely destroys the Helldivers universe in space, or the other way around. So yeah. But with the xenomorphs it's different. You can, because of course they're ground-based, and you probably look at it at a more localized, probably at best a planetary scale. But for this matchup we'll use the xenomorphs basically like shown in Aliens 1 and 2, since I got to admit I'm not an expert on the xenomorphs, so I might say some wrong things, but I'm just doing this for fun, so yeah, deal with it. So what we'll be doing is, the scenario is there is a ship that has been taken over by xenomorphs, a decently large ship. They have a queen, they have 1,000 drones, I don't know, they got a bunch of drones, they got a bunch of eggs ready, and that ship will be crashing on a few planets, basically. Now, I won't consider the environment of the planet as a factor here, because I don't think it makes that much of a difference. Okay, the xenomorphs may fare a bit better in a jungle planet, but still I don't think it makes that much of a difference, because they're adapted to every environment. They can even survive out in space, so yeah, that won't really matter. So I'll be throwing them on 4 different planets, those planets being 1 for each faction in the Helldivers universe. Let's start with the most glorious, the most democratic, and the freest of the factions, Super Earth. Now, I won't throw the xenomorphs on Super Earth, because that would probably complicate things. You can't really tell how extreme the response would be if they would be thrown on Super Earth, but I'd say Super Earth protects literally itself probably better than its colonies. So I'll throw it on a planet with, let's say, a pretty regular planet, a bunch of colonies, and maybe 1 or 2 megacities. It doesn't matter that much. Now, I think if you'd throw a xenomorph ship onto a Super Earth planet, I think the xenomorphs overrun this planet. Now, why do I think that? Because the game Helldivers 2 is about the Helldivers, which means that any other sort of Super Earth armed forces, like the SCAF soldiers, I'm sorry to say, I love them, but they're not all that competent. And I'm not just talking because in the gameplay, I know that's restrictions of the AI, but I'm saying that because basically the only progress made in the war is done by the Helldivers. And okay, usually I wouldn't really consider gameplay things or tropes, or the roles characters or factions play in their universe, But I think because the xenomorphs are also kind of that, they play a role. They play the role as in the nearly unstoppable horror, even though, in my humble opinion, the xenomorphs, at least as shown in those movies, wouldn't be like a threat. Like if a xenomorph landed on Earth, I don't think they would take over the Earth, even the Earth from Alien. I'm not saying they're not a threat. I said that a bit wrong. They're a threat, of course. Individually, they're extremely tough to kill, but then they don't spread fast enough, in my opinion, to really be like the Flood from Halo, like an unstoppable force. So yeah, because they play so much of a role and kinda get boosted by plot, I'll also consider that on the Super Earth side, which is why the Thief won't really fare well. And by the time Super Earth deploys the helldivers, I'd say most of the planet has been overrun, turning it into one giant hive. Now at this point the aliens have a huge advantage. However, we're talking about characters that really are factions that have a role to play in their universe, and the helldivers are the main characters. You could really put them up against anything. You could put them up against Kratos or the Flood, something unbeatable, and they'd beat it just because they are Super Earth. Super Earth has to persist, Now I'm not gonna use that logic to the extreme and say, yeah, they win. But I do think they would be able to beat the xenomorph-infested planet. I think once the infection has reached, or the infestation has reached that planetary level, I think the helldivers would be deployed in large numbers, because that's just kind of what happens when new factions drop. I know that because it's a game and people like new things, especially crossovers, but I'm not that person that thinks really everything is canon. I know that's sad about the game, but it's, in some cases, I don't really like it, but I still think if there would be a brand new threat, a whole lot of helldivers would go there. I think that is kind of part of the canon. Now, if we're talking realistically, really realistically, if the entire planet is infected, you gotta consider the planet is full of civilians, really helpless civilians, right? They're supposed to own guns and shit, but in the game we always see them running around, and I think, don't tell my democracy officer, but I do think Super Earth civilians are kind of pussies. Not in the... I think it's part of the humor, Super Earth is supposed to be so strong, and you can have guns because that's your freedom. It's like a mockery of the US, the entire game, right? And that's why I think that it's supposed to be part of the joke, that those are the kind of people that would do all the big talk, like I would crush any bug that pulls up to my neighborhood, and when push comes to shove, they're like pretty helpless, really helpless, like running around like save us, and the voice lines they have. Anyways, so yeah, that'd be a bunch of hosts. So if this planet were to be overrun, realistically it would be extremely difficult to take back. So I would see it as kind of a long-term thing. So even from a gameplay standpoint, it would make sense to keep the planet just as that. You can basically fight as much as you want, because it's not gonna make a huge difference. They couldn't get away with just, not adding a liberation bar, but it would be like Osha-Une, I think, like the Hive world, where it's like, even though half of the player base is there, it basically wouldn't change a thing. And if the players would actually liberate it, I think they would kind of do it in a way where they say a few days or weeks later, yeah, like the Ministry of Science has picked up one of the eggs to study and shit, and on another planet it break out. Now, I don't think they would do it in a way where the xenomorphs would like take sectors and stuff like the other factions. It just wouldn't make a whole lot of sense. That being said, it doesn't make a lot of sense for the Terminids either, but I don't think they would want to make the xenomorphs a whole new faction. But now I'm talking a lot of gameplay. I think I should move away from that. Anyways, I still don't think, logically speaking, the xenomorphs would spread like a faction. They'd probably stay concentrated on one planet, because even though Super Earth can be like arrogant and stupid, I don't think they would be that incompetent. Also, yeah, I think it would sometimes come to outbreaks, but usually not on a large scale. Maybe sometimes another planet would be overrun, but I don't think it would be that much of a deal. It wouldn't, let's just say it like that, the xenomorphs wouldn't be a problem on the level of the Terminids. Now, what do I actually think about the matchup, Helldivers versus Xenomorphs? I'd say it would be a bit like fighting the Predator strain, only with a bit less bugs, or Xenomorphs in this case, but each individual is stronger. Now, usually when you compare the Xenomorphs, the acid blood does play a huge role, but I don't think it matters that much, because how do you kill a xenomorph as a Helldiver? I'd personally again do it like with the Rupture bugs, Predator bug strain. I'd take my cookout shotgun, and they'd probably be a bit like stalkers, only that they can't turn invisible. They jump around, and when they get close to you, they would do a lot of damage. But, you know, if you shoot it with your gun, the blood would splash away from you, right? Now, I'm not saying there wouldn't be deaths by acid, but I am saying that I think the acid blood isn't like a huge problem. I think the xenomorphs would be kind of like a bit like a flash mob, not as extreme, but they would be damaged by light armor pen. However, they would just suck up a lot of damage. Like, you'd have to at least shoot a full mag of cookout shells at them to down one. Now, to be fair, that would get, gameplay wise, that would get old really fast to just have one enemy and then I guess the queen, maybe rarely an infected dog. I honestly, I think there was the xenomorph in Alien 3 was a dog, but I don't think you ever get that clear of a view of it. I don't really remember it being very distinctive, right? So yeah, dog xenomorphs aren't like crazy different. So yeah, from a gameplay standpoint, it wouldn't be all that interesting, but you could just walk through the hives. You know, it would be an interesting environment, or the, you know, black gooey shit and shit. I don't know. It's hard to describe, but you know, the queens would probably take really a lot of firepower to take out. Like, I do still think they'd probably be medium armor penetration, but they would soak up a whole lot of damage. Like, not as much as a Hive Lord, obviously, but more than the other enemies in the game, probably. And you'd also get swarmed by xenomorphs. So, and obviously xenomorphs, I think, would probably one-shot any Helldiver with either their tongue or their tail. Maybe, let's say the tail is a two-shot, the tongue is a one-shot, because they won't be using their tongue that often. And then maybe a slash is like a three-shot, you know, kind of keep it balanced, I don't know. Anyway, let's be fair, it wouldn't be all that interesting of a faction. But I do think they would survive. Maybe Super Earth would say, okay, this is bad, this is a Meridia level situation, and would somehow blow up the planet. Again, if there was a real crossover, that would probably be the route they would go, since, it's probably gotta expire at some point, and that's a really satisfying way to end such a crossover. And they would probably also say that some eggs have been recovered by the Ministry of Science, so if they ever want to do a crossover again, they could. The next faction will be hitting with a xenomorph infestation or the Illuminate. Now, these one are interesting because while I'm basically 100% sure that the xenomorphs could incubate the regular Illuminate, so the Overseers basically, what is more interesting are the Voteless and the Flesh Mobs. For the sake of argument, I will assume that they are able to incubate the Voteless without any problem, which would mean that they would have, a lot of food and a lot of means to recreate on Illuminate planets as well. However, for the Flesh Mob, I will assume that it's more difficult, at least, given especially that the Flesh Mob has multiple faces. Okay, I'd say if there is a facehugger on each face, that's the rules I'm going with. The Flesh Mob gets incubated. However, I think because the Flesh Mobs are just so strong, they would probably rip the facehuggers off of them before enough could overrun them. Also, I think actually a Flesh Mob has a really good chance at taking down a xenomorph, given that they are basically bullet sponges and can tank like a whole lot of damage. So even if they got splashed with the acid, they could probably still finish the job even if they died afterwards. As a whole, the Illuminate are very well equipped to deal with the xenomorphs, so especially because they got a lot of ranged and especially a lot of flying troops. An elevated Overseer is still reachable, so is an Observer. However, once we get to like Interlopers or Leviathans, yeah, the xenomorphs are done for, let's be real. And while there is a chance that they'd be able to take a planet, I just don't think they would, to be honest. I don't think they would be able to take an Illuminate planet conventionally, and if they did, there is a good chance, in my opinion, that the Illuminate would just gloss the planet, as they did with, the planets leading up to Super Earth after their assault over Mars. So yeah, I don't think they have very good chances, the xenomorphs. However, it is still possible that they were able to get a foothold. Yeah, but then again, we have the same scenario. The planet will probably eventually be taken by Super Earth, and it's basically the same scenario from there on out. Now, the next faction are the automatons. And this is where I think the xenomorphs just don't stand a chance anymore, simply because they can't incubate anything on automaton worlds. While I do assume that the Helldivers universe has the planets in the Helldivers universe have some large animals outside of Terminate that we don't see, I don't think it would be enough to sustain a xenomorph population, especially with the bots hunting them down. Though it is possible that the bots would keep them around as biological weapons against Super Earth, because as we've discussed before, the xenomorphs are pretty effective at taking over Super Earth governed planets, and with the automatons spreading them throughout the galaxy, it would be truly terrifying. Now that I think about it, this is possible for the Illuminates too, however, I do not think so. But maybe, okay, this is interesting. Let's go back to the Illuminate for a second. Maybe the Illuminate would do genetic experiments on them, and maybe they'd be able to, combine it with their corruption of humanity with the voteless and the flesh mobs. Now imagine a flesh mob, but it bleeds acid. Yeah, that'd be pretty fucked. Right, I forgot to talk about... right, the thing is, when xenomorphs infests or incubates a being that's not a human, it creates a different kind of xenomorph, right, I think. I'm not an expert, again. It would be decently interesting what would happen if they managed to incubate a flesh mob. Probably, I kinda imagine something like the... how was it called from Halo? The thing that runs at you, then explodes, and then a lot of infection forms pop out. Something like that, Basically, I feel like a flesh mob would be used to create eggs or more facehuggers. That's just my theory, that's what I'd like to think. Or maybe it would be like a crazy xenomorph with multiple tails, because the flesh mob has multiple hands. I don't know, it can be whatever. Okay, back to the automatons. Again, there is, in my opinion, a pretty high chance that the automatons would use them as bioweapons. I mean, gameplay-wise, it's not very realistic, since, it'd have to be a permanent cooperation crossover. But putting that aside, I think it's decently likely. And yeah, otherwise, the xenomorphs don't have a chance. They'd eventually just be overrun, and let's be real, a xenomorph is not beating a factory strider, for example, and I don't even think a xenomorph queen is beating a factory strider. And if push really came to shove again, they'd probably just orbital bombard the crashed ship where the xenomorphs originate from. Like, they don't stand a chance. Now, for probably the most interesting faction in this video, the Terminates. Now, let's be real, I don't see the xenomorphs having very good chances, just because there are so many Terminates and they reproduce so incredibly quickly. There's basically no chance that they'd survive the onslaught. However, I do want to talk about the different xenomorph types that could originate from incubated Terminates, especially like the big ones. I mean, the spewers, so nursing spewers especially, again, I think it'd be like with the flesh mob, a xenomorph that would, like a queen, produce eggs, or like explode into a bunch of not xenomorph facehuggers, or maybe chest bursters. Maybe multiple chest bursters would spawn from a nursing spewer or battle spewer. It's actually really interesting. What else do we have? Chargers, of course. It's pretty straightforward. It's just a more bulky charging xenomorph. I'd say probably more similar to the Charger than the Xenomorph. It would be interesting. I don't think we ever saw a We almost certainly saw a xenomorph going for brute force in the comics at some point. I haven't read those again, I'm not an expert by any means. However, it would be interesting to see a charger-like xenomorph, maybe a stronger faceplate, maybe the big forehead turns into a horn, I don't know. It's kinda interesting. Then of course the Bile Titans, right. This would be just a really big xenomorph. I think it would be similar to a queen. Maybe every Bile Titan incubate would create a queen. It's a terrifying thought, to be honest. Yeah, I think most of these Terminids are pretty easy to incubate. I think they have a mouth about the right size, and even for the Bile Titan, we know that the facehuggers aren't vulnerable to acid, so yeah. The Impaler is interesting. I think it has a mouth. Let's just assume it has. It can be incubated. Imagine a xenomorph Impaler. I mean, it probably have like, instead of the tentacle shield in front of its face, it probably have a more classical xenomorph face, maybe a bit like that of a queen, because a queen also has a kind of a shield, but like a beard of xenomorph tails that it could also bury in the ground and use like an Impaler. Yeah, that's my take on that. What other bugs do we have? The Shriekers are interesting. They would be hard to incubate, however, if you like find their nests, I think it would be possible if you laid a bunch of facehugger eggs around the nest, and at that point I still don't know if they would be incubated, since they're pretty small. Maybe they'd be used as food instead. However, there's also a possibility that the queen would think that it would be advantageous for them to incubate a flying animal. In that case, yeah, imagine a flying xenomorph. Now, I think it would be a bit smaller than a regular xenomorph, and instead of those tubes on its back, it would have wings. Maybe the tail would be shorter, probably, because otherwise it would be really unstable. Yeah, it would basically be a Shrieker, but deadlier with acid blood. Yeah, not very pleasant. Now, the very interesting things are when we go to the hive world, right? Let's be honest, they have even less chances of surviving there, but if they did, it would be interesting to see what they could infest. Now, a dragon roach, again, difficult to infest, but possible. And if they incubated a dragon roach, it would be terrifying. Imagine a flying xenomorph queen that could spit its acid at you. Yeah, terrifying. But that, I think, is the most likely outcome if they were to get incubated. Now with the Hive Lord, let's be honest, I really don't think they would get incubated. I don't think it works with the anatomy. However, if they would, it would be terrifying. I mean, I hardly can imagine anything like it. I mean, imagine a giant, but in this case black worm. It would still be able to spit its acid as it already does in the game. Yeah, it's hard to imagine anything more. I mean, maybe it could spit its acid from all over its body. I don't know. Maybe it would have tails around its body where it could stab you with, and I don't know. It's weird. It's hard to imagine a xenomorph worm. I don't know what upgrades you could possibly make to the Hive Lords. Overall, the xenomorphs, in my opinion, are underpowered for the Helldivers verse. They are not that strong, and there is even a decent chance that they just wouldn't be able to gain a foothold on a super Earth planet. I don't think they would be a major faction. The most dangerous outcome would be if the automatons used them as bioweapons, closely followed by if the Illuminate combined them with their genetic research. Otherwise, on their own, I don't think the xenomorphs have much of a chance. At least not as far as I know. There's probably some obscure lore out there that actually puts them on universal threat. So yeah, that is pretty much it. That is my analysis on how the xenomorphs would fare within the Helldivers universe. Yeah, I guess let me know your opinion in the comments.